So Frederick Douglass, right, his next slave, and so he kind of amazed the South because he was this living example that, also I want to preface, I'm going to use the word Negroes in this lecture. I thought about it. I'm going to use that word quite a bit. It carries the correct time period and weight to it. I'm going to use that word. But he exemplified that not all Negroes were stupid and, you know, this Southern misconception, this hate. He exemplified that to them and to the North. The North couldn't believe that he was an ex-slave. He was this amazing orator and had, you know, self-taught himself and was well-read and just liked people. You know, they couldn't believe that this guy was an ex-slave. I'm going to get to the Dred Scott decision later, but this is something that he said after that happened. With an earnest, aching heart, I have long looked for the realization of the hope of my people. Standing, as it were, barefoot and treading upon the sharp and flinty rocks of the present, and looking out upon the boundless sea of the future, I have sought, in my humble way, to penetrate the intervening mists and clouds and perchance to descry, in the dim and shadowy distance, the white flag of freedom, the precise speck of time at which the cruel bondage of my people should end, and the long entombed millions rise from the foul grave of slavery and death. But of that time I can know nothing, and you can know nothing. All is uncertain at this point. Beautiful poet. This is actually from his first public speech. I'm going to talk more about him later because I have to. Because again, he was John Brown's only friend. So, I'm not going to talk about Frederick Douglass. Am I going to talk about John Brown because he was a white abolitionist? No. If I was going to do that, actually it would make more sense to talk about this guy, Thomas Garrett. Thomas Garrett was the station master at the end of the Underground Railroad. He helped free at least 2,700 slaves. Very, very successful abolitionist. He was a Quaker. Quakers are awesome.
Nobel Prize.
He was really open about being an abolitionist and freeing these slaves. He didn't have hidden rooms in his house. He was really open about it. He was a Quaker, so he's kind of also quiet about it. At one point, he got brought in and thrown in jail. They fined him a couple $1,000, put a lien on his house, got back out, just immediately, you know, started freeing slaves again. During the Civil War, the Free Negroes of Wilmington, it's the organization they called themselves, guarded his house. They thought that in the Civil War he was definitely going to be attacked to get freed so many slaves. Finally, the slaves that truly gained their freedom at the end of the Civil War, they took him out, you know, around town, paraded him around the streets, called him Moses. A lot of people were called Moses. I'll get back to that in a second too. So, but I'm not going to talk about Thomas Garrett either. I'm going to talk about John Brown because it was white, violent abolitionist. Yes. The last lecture was not so much on vampires, but it was about one particular person who was this horrible, violent person. And I don't know what it says about myself, the 2 lectures I've given so far about really, really violent people that no one liked. John Brown was a white person killing white people to free black people. That's why he is important. His race is important, but the actions that he took are really important. What do you want about it? So, John Brown. I went with this picture of John Brown. This is how John Brown was remembered. Again, he was called Moses. But this isn't who John Brown was. John Brown was this guy. A cranky-looking asshole. He's got a lot of character in his face. I wouldn't want to hang out with him. At all. This is who John Brown was. I'm going to put that on the side for a second. And just remember that there's these two striking differences, who the man was and who he was remembered as. And skip ahead. So in 1894, Frederick Douglass gets a bunch of people together and they want to erect this monument to John Brown at Harper's Ferry. And what the hell is the guy's name? Hold on. Yeah, William Gallagher. He ran the Virginia Free Press, this paper in Virginia, and he was, very. I'm pretty sure I didn't find any proof of this. I'm thinking he was part of the KKK. Pretty sure he was, but he heard news of this, and so he was just like, well, if all these black people are going to erect a statue of this white guy, I have an idea for a statue that we should erect. And so John Brown's raid. John Brown's raid, I'm going to get way more into it later, but just to tell you the very beginning of it. They get to Harper's Ferry, they're going to storm this armory, and they're like hiding out under this bridge. And this station master, who's a free black man, is just like walking around the railroad tracks. And I think, there's different accounts, but I think he was actually looking for a railroad spike. And these abolitionists that were in the ground pop out and they're like, hey, don't find us, we're here, we're Star Wars, we're here to rescue. And his reaction was to run. Of course it was. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and these guys with guns pop out the bushes. So he runs, and he gets shot in the back because John Brown and his men don't want this guy to go alert to town. He doesn't die. He gets back to the station, and he dies a slow death over like a day and a half. And so the first casualty of John Brown's raid was a black man. And this fact just got repeated over and over and over and over again. So finally, this guy, William Gallagher, got his way, but it didn't go up until 1931. And I want to share with you the plaque for Hayward Shepherd, who's the guy that got shot. Plaque for him. On the night of October 16, 1859, Hayward Shepherd, an industrious and respected colored free man, was mortally wounded by John Brown's raiders in pursuance of his duties as an employee of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company. He became the first victim of the attempted insurrection. There's some keywords in here. Insurrection, raiders. Second paragraph, though. This boulder, that's the best they could do. This boulder is erected by the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of the Confederate Veterans as a memorial to Hayward Shepherd, exemplifying the character and faithfulness of thousands of Negroes who, under many temptations through subsequent years of war, so conducted themselves that no stain was left upon a record which is the peculiar heritage of the American people and an everlasting tribute to the best on both races. That went up in the 1930s in Harper's Ferry. And it's so gross.
Is it still there?
No, I can talk about that later. W.E.B. Du Bois kind of spearheaded getting it taken down. It sucks. I mean, because kind of what they're saying in like this really veiled way is like, well, this black guy didn't like John raid, so maybe slavery's not that bad or something. Like, it's just really layered and it sucks and it's gross. So again, this is in the 1930s, so well after the Civil War, and people were still sort of confused on how to think about John Brown even this time. How was he remembered? So back to John Brown. He was a Calvinist. Calvinism. I forget the word for it, but I think just say pillars of Calvinism. Total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints. Total depravity means that we're born into sin. By nature, we're sinners. You have to fight it. That is your instinct, is to defy God. Unconditional election means that how do I say it? God has already chosen, and it's predestination. God knows who's going to get into heaven, and He's chosen these people. You're coming to heaven, you're going to heaven, you're doing this thing, you're all good people, your lives are shit. That's unconditional election. Limited atonement. Limited atonement, I actually forget what limited atonement is right now.
Yeah!
Okay, so irresistible grace. Irresistible grace means if you are one of the chosen people, you have no choice in it. You have been selected to do things, and you're going to do them. And so Calvinists stop being Calvinists. Calvinists were like, well, they were never really Calvinists anyway. That's weird. Anyway, perseverance of the saints. It doesn't say. It's not saying saints like you would think in Catholicism. People that are in heaven or have achieved sainthood, but it goes back to unconditional election, where if you've been chosen and you know that you've been chosen, you have a path ahead of you, and you have to follow it, and you have to do what you have to follow it, and you don't have a choice. You need to be a man of God. He's a Calvinist. John Brown was not a politician, didn't care about politics in any way. He believed in this higher power, this higher morality. And beyond that, he also was of this very predetermined belief system. He had been chosen by God in John Brown's mind to do what he needed to do. He got called Moses a lot, but who he looked up to the most was Oliver Cromwell. I'll get to that, because that's funny. I'll get to that really soon. Oliver Cromwell. He was this English guy who killed a bunch of Irish people. He was part of the Parliament. He was this general, and he was a lot of things. He helped the king be executed. He was a big on my birthday. Awesome.
Yeah, Jerry.
And he quoted the Bible as far as one of the reasons that the king should be killed, which is the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. So why, if you know Oliver Cromwell, this guy that just slaughtered the Irish, why did John Brown look up to him? Well, it's because of this really racist guy named Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle was an author. He wrote a bunch of books. So he wrote this book on Oliver Cromwell, and what he talked about with Oliver Cromwell was that Oliver Cromwell didn't want an army. He has this quote, Oliver Cromwell: "I'd rather have a plain russet-coated captain that knows what he fights for and loves what he knows than that you call a gentleman and is nothing else." Thomas Carlyle loved Oliver Cromwell. He was talking about how he used the common man to fight. And at one point, Oliver Cromwell stopped Parliament. But Thomas Carlyle said this is like, well, no, sometimes you have to fight your government to get done what you need to get done. And Thomas Carlyle painted Oliver Cromwell in this fashion, and kind of just washed over the whole killing lots of innocent people thing. And this is what John Brown read. Thomas Carlyle then went on to write this thing called The Occasional Discourse of the Negro Question, which was kind of about like, oh, Britain, you keep saying slavery is wrong, but all of your white people you kind of treat like slaves, so maybe you should deal with your own problem kind of thing. And then he got labeled as a racist. And he was. He changed the name of it to The Occasional Discourse of the Nigger Question. He originally had released it anonymously, and after it was like, you're racist and we hate you, he was just like, well, I'm going to change it to this. So, piece of shit. But I find it ironic and kind of beautiful that this horrible racist had this different effect on John Brown. It's kind of neat. So John Brown, fourth of 8 children, born in Connecticut, he was raised in Ohio. His father's apprentice was Jesse R. Grant, Ulysses Grant's father. Kind of cool. From Massachusetts. He wanted to be like a pastor, basically, but reading hurt his eyes, he said. So he stopped doing that. He got married. He had 7 kids with his first wife. She died. He got married again, had 13 kids with his next wife. 9 of them did not live past the age of 5. His first wife was Yankee Lusk, also named, and Mary Ann Day was his second wife. And so he was a really, really bad businessman. Horrible businessman. In 6 different states, he started 20 different businesses. All of them failed. He went to bankruptcy jail.
Where do you keep getting money?
What's that?
Where do you keep getting money?
Well, it was kind of a sign of the times. What was happening is that, I mean, the government needed more and more people to move different places. So he was like, you're in debt. Move to this crazy territory. And then he kept doing that, moving his giant family all over the place. And it was still, you know, the federal government wasn't very powerful, so you could kind of go to a different state, you know, no one's going to track you down still. I'm going to skip Elijah P. Lovejoy for 1 second to get to no one liked him. He was a complete asshole. He literally had no friends.
I get married twice.
Right?
There you go.
He was vain. His brother said that he was impervious to a joke. One of his friends was, it was one of his employees, he said he was like a king against whom there is no uprising. He punished his kids, punished his employees physically. He was an asshole in every way. But he hated slavery, and his father hated slavery, and very, very intensely. So this thing happened. Elijah P. Lovejoy wrote this thing called the Ultimate Observer in Illinois, and Elijah P. Lovejoy was putting out this abolitionist paper with all of these like slave owners around him, and he just keeps putting it out. So eventually he's murdered brutally. His printing press is burned down. He was a Presbyterian preacher. He was murdered horribly. So John Brown, I believe this, 1837, goes to his eulogy. It says, "Here before God in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." And I kind of think it's here. So here we're dealing with this guy is this Calvinist, and he's just waiting for his mission from God. You know what I mean? And he's just like, I hate slavery, and then this guy's brutally killed, and he's like, that's it, you got it. So I need to, and I'm going to run through this as fast as I possibly can, because I can't really talk about John Brown unless I talk to you about the sort of social, political mess that was happening. And I've got to start in the year 1619 so that I can get to the 1850s. So really quick, just like bullet points. 1619, first slaves are brought to the United States. It's about 20 of them. It's a Dutch ship. 1640, John Punch. John Punch was told by Virginian court that he was a slave and he's going to be a slave until he died. 1652, this Rhode Island law was passed that said, all right, you can have a slave, but you can only have a slave can only be in slavery for 10 years, and after they turn to the ripe old age of 24, not allowed to be a slave anymore no matter what. 1654, Tom Kessler is the first person basically the Virginian court said, you are now a slave. That was kind of his punishment from the court. 1671, Virginia is at this point where 5% of the population is slaves, are slaves. 1712, there's a giant New York slave revolt. 6 white people are killed. They executed somewhere around 20 black people for it. One of those people was actually killed on the breaking wheel. If you don't know what that is, look it up if you don't want to sleep. 1719, Virginia raises the slave tariff. Virginia was kind of like, we want to get rid of slavery. No, we don't at all. And that was kind of like their way, like, we'll just make it more expensive. Bullshit. So 1741, Mary Burton, asshole. 16 years old, she gets caught stealing with a couple of other people. And there's been these fires in Lower Manhattan. And to get out, she tells the cops, she's just like, okay, all of the poor white people and all of the black people are going to burn down Manhattan and take all of the white women for themselves and then elect a king. And they believe her. They connected what she was saying to the 13 fires that have been happening in Lower Manhattan. It's never been proven that it was in any way connected. A couple of people were gibbeted, which is like a cave on a cage on a gallows, basically, that most of the people would be put in alive and would just die slowly of starvation and dehydration. 1774, Quakers. Quakers started the Pennsylvania Society for the Abolition of Slavery. 1776, all men are created equal. No, that happened. This whole thing happened where Thomas Jefferson actually, right after he wrote that, was sent this letter by this free black man being like, so does that pertain to me? And he wrote back with this response, slavery really embarrasses me. No, I'm sorry. 1777, Vermont prohibited slavery. 1778, Virginia bans international slave trade. 1780, Massachusetts prohibits slavery. 1782, Virginia, manumission. Manumission is when a slave owner gives his slave freedom. It had been this really awful law, and they changed it in 1782 to be like, okay, well now you can give your slave freedom in a deed or a will. 1783, New Hampshire says if you're born in the state of New Hampshire, you're free no matter what. 1784, Congress by one vote. One vote. Thomas Jefferson tries to get this thing passed, just like, let's just end slavery, it's just fucking over. Congress it loses by a vote in 1784. Pretty nuts. 1786, George Washington writes this letter, and it's just like, me more than any other person wants to end slavery. Fuck that. He's an asshole. I'll get back to that in 2 quick seconds. 1787, the Northwest Ordinance passes. So the Northwest Territory is like Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, all these things. Basically, the law says the federal government's going to take care of it right now. And slavery is not allowed in that territory. If a slave runs away into that territory, you can go get them. And after that area starts to become states, they can decide their own law. 1787. 1787 is when the Constitution finally gets really accepted in the United States. But it protects slavery in Article 1, Section 9, and Article 1, Section 2. 1790. By this time, there's 697,681 slaves in the United States. 1791, Vermont is now free. Robert Carter III, crazy dude, he owned this giant plantation. And when he was about to die, he just freed 452 of his slaves. Really weird. Anyway, it just didn't happen. For that amount, it's just, I don't know much about it. I want to look up exactly what happened. So anyway, 1793, Fugitive Slave Act happens. Maybe most people are familiar with that. Also the Cotton Gin. 1799, this is the thing with George Washington that really bothers me. So 1799, George Washington's about to die, and he writes this thing, it's just like, all of my slaves are free. But not really, they're actually, his wife now has them. But as soon as she dies, they're free. So he dies the next day, or like a day later. Now she has them, and she doesn't let them free until like the day before she dies. And what I find really funny, I guess, and annoying is that for many people in the Union, they're like, oh my God, George Washington. So many people should just live by your example. You're so sweet. You died. Oh, we love George. It's like when you're that fucking old, do you really need, you know what I mean? Over 100 fucking slaves. It's just, fuck you. Anyway, so 1800, Gabriel Prosser, he has this idea. He wants to start this armory in Richmond. He's a black guy, fugitive slave. He wants to start this armory and arm a bunch of people and start this giant revolt and take everything over. It gets found out about it before he starts because it rains. And he runs away to Norfolk, Virginia, where this black guy actually sees him and he's like, oh, I'm running away. And the guy's like, oh, cool, stay right here. And then goes tells the authorities for the reward money. And then the black guy that turned him in got like a small, tiny fraction of the reward money. What the fuck did you expect, though? Anyway, so 1803, Louisiana Purchase. I'm going to skip over that. 1804. So New Jersey finally prohibits slavery, and so they're the last state above the Mason-Dixon line to do it. So now the Mason-Dixon line is the thing that people start saying. The North is now free, pretty much. There's still slaves up there, but anyway. So 1807. 1807. Slave immigration becomes a federal offense. If you work on a ship, part of the slave trade, it's a federal offense. Anything dealing with the slave trade is a federal offense. 1810. By now there are 1,191,364 slaves just in the southern states. Skyrocketed really, really quickly. 1816. I'm going to stop there for a second. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson, called it like this embarrassing slave trade thing and what to do about it and all this other kind of shit. And so many different factions have been arguing about what to do about slavery. And one of my, I just think that the most amazing, American Colonization Society starts, and how they want to solve the slavery problem is they literally want to send all the slaves back to Africa. And so they start freeing slaves and buying slaves, freedom, to send them back. They started in 1816, but the first boat didn't leave until 1821. They sent 10,000 slaves back to Africa, and that's the country of Liberia is settled by ex-slaves from the United States. But the slaves. Oh yeah, so this is funny. One of the people, so the large portion of missionaries really got behind this because they were like, oh, this is great. They were here, and we converted them to Christianity, and then we'll send them back to Africa. Which is like, even the missionaries is trying to get the black men to do their fucking work for them. Right?